everyone, this is Lisa Dickinson here today with a technique video on making distress stripes. This is a really simple technique that's perfect when you want to add a lot of color, pattern, or texture to a page. It's also a great way to put a dent in your ever-growing pile of paper scraps. So let's get started. Today I'm working with the October JBS Mercantile Paper Crafting Kit. And you can see I have some strips of the papers already cut. This month's kit is a great mix of oranges and yellows and aquas with some neutral grays and browns thrown in. And it's a really great palette for autumn themed events. But for my layout, I decided to use them with these photos of my son at one of his cross-country meets. His school colors are orange and black, and I knew that these shots of him in his orange jersey would look really good with the kit papers. So the two photos I selected were printed out on a piece of 4x6 photo paper. So it makes them about 4 inches tall by 3 inches wide. And I'm planning to make a vertically striped background for them using these paper strips. I've cut all of these pieces and they're the same width. It's about 1.25 inches wide. And then they're just various lengths that range from about 8 inches to 9 inches tall. I went ahead and I cut out 8 strips for my page. But you could cut them thinner and just use more stripes, or you could do a wider stripe and use fewer pieces. Totally up to you. But I'm just going to lay them out across the page, just alternating the patterns and the colors, kind of like that. I'm going to stagger the edges just a little bit, and I want to make sure that they fit. That looks pretty good, so I think I can move on to distressing the edges of the stripes now. I have this little distressing tool from Heidi Swapp, and it looks like a little Pac-Man, but there is a razor blade on the inner corner, so it makes it really easy to rough up the paper's edge just by running it along the side. This particular tool is really old, and I don't think it's available anymore, but I will link a similar one from Tim Holtz in the supplies if you want to track it down. Before I start working on the distressing, I like to grab a trash can and do the distressing over the top of it, because as you can see as I start here, you'll have all these little bits of paper flying around. It doesn't take a lot of pressure to rough up the edge, but I like to do just little small sections at a time. And there are lots of little crumbs that result, so it's nice to have some type of a receptacle underneath just to catch all of them and not make such a mess of your workspace. Alright, I'm on my last stripe here, and I'm just going to finish distressing these last few sides. I wanted to mention that you can do this technique on just about any paper as long as it's substantial enough to hold up to the razor. Really lightweight pattern paper or vellum won't distress well because they'll just tear, but most of the double-sided pattern papers or cardstock on the market will work really great. Now that the stripes are all roughed up, I'm going to lay them out on my cardstock in the order that I want them, and then I'll eventually stick them down with some adhesive. As I mentioned earlier, I cut my stripes to different lengths so I'd have a staggered look. And you can certainly cut yours all the same if you want a more uniform background. But since this page is about my son's running, I wanted to create a sense of motion, and I think the varying lengths kind of help to do that. So I think that looks pretty good. I might just swap this longer one right here. I just kind of want an even up, down on the edges. There we go. I was getting ready to move on to the next step, which is stitching just around the edges of each stripe. But I think that I want to add a bit more contrast to my background. So I went ahead and I grabbed a sheet of darker gray cardstock right here, and I just want to see what it would look like if I used it on the bottom half of this layout. I'm going to slide it under here like so, just to see how it looks. I kind of like how the darker color gives more weight to the bottom half, and it makes these dark gray stripes, this polka dot pattern paper, not have so much contrast and not stand out so much. And then I also like how it creates a horizontal line that kind of helps balance out all the vertical lines of the stripes. Okay, I'm going to commit to this two-tone background and just adhere it lightly to my background cardstock before I move on to the stitching. I'm not going to be adding a ton of adhesive since I'm going to be stitching everything in place to hold it down. But if stitching isn't your thing, you can skip this step or just add stitch marks with a pen. Personally, I love the look of sewing on a page, and I do it on just about every layout that I create. And I'm going to show you in the next step how the stitching allows you to add even more dimension to this background. So my sewing is complete, and I'll try to give you a little close-up here. You can see that I sewed around all four sides of each strip using white thread. I really hate re-threading my sewing machine, so unless it's a special page that calls for colored thread, I will use white because that's what I have ready to go most of the time, and luckily it usually works. I mentioned earlier that I have another technique for adding a bit more texture to this striped background. I just use my craft knife and I'll slide it under the edges of the stripes up to the point where the stitching starts and then bend it upwards. And this just lifts up the edges and it adds another element of dimension to the design. With my background done, I'm ready to add in the other elements of my page. I'm going to start with my photos, and I think I'll position them to the left, about here. I have one photo of Hayden after the race, and then this one is an action shot of him at the finish line. His goal at this race was to have a really good kick and finish strong, and he managed to pass up several other racers right in the last stretch, so I wanted this layout to document that he reached his goal and he had a great run. So I'm figuring I will have my photos here and then possibly my title over here to the right, and then leave some room for journaling, probably on strips of cardstock, and room for a lot of fun embellishments and places to add some more color. So I pulled out some items from the paper crafting kit and the artisan add-on that might work here. And the first thing I wanted to incorporate was this monogram sticker. It comes from this set from Mambi, and they look sort of hand sketched. They're almost 3 inches tall. And I pulled out the H for Hayden, and I think I'm going to like that pop of white on top of all those colors. And then I also have a sticker sheet, and it is from October Afternoon. And when I'm contemplating where to add stickers on a layout, I always like to just cut them out off of the, with their backing still attached, but cut them out of the main sheet. And that way I can just place them in various spots on the page, and I can move them around as necessary without having the adhesive backing like ruin anything if I should decide to move it. I also have a pack of die cuts, and it's from October Afternoon Daily Flash, and I pulled out a few of those to tuck in amongst these stickers. Like so. And I always like to add circles into my designs wherever possible. And these fancy pants flare will work for that. I like this aqua one. Maybe about right there. So I've gone ahead and I die cut the word kick to use as my page title. I created this in Illustrator just using a brush tool and my handwriting, and then I cut it out of dark gray cardstock on my silhouette. I thought I would center it here, kind of towards the bottom. Move that up just a bit. So this is kind of a rough layout of my page elements and where they're going to go. I do still need to do my journaling, and I think it would fit on a long strip across the bottom here. So I'm going to go print that out, and I will be right back. Okay, I printed my journaling on white cardstock, and I cut out the strip to run just along the bottom of the design right here. I also have the date that I printed on the same sheet. Most times I use my date stamp, but I just went ahead and printed this one since there was room. I think I'll tuck that in up there. One thing I noticed while I was working on my journaling is that this dark title is kind of getting lost amongst all the colorful stripes. I'd like it to pop a bit more. So I used the same cut file, but I cut it out of white cardstock, and I'm going to layer these together like this with the white behind it. And I think the white will help it just visually separate it from the background. I've gone ahead and adhered everything down, and you can see I added the white drop shadow behind the title, and it really helps set it apart from all the colors in the background. I also added my journaling strip here along the bottom, and I think this page is really just about finished. I have one more small accent that I'd like to add, and it's these epoxy stickers. They're called Pop Drops from October Afternoon, and I want to use them up here in the left-hand corner and then down in the right corner to create a sight line that just helps guide the eye diagonally through my design, so that you'll have a starting point up in the left corner and it will just guide you all the way to the ending point down below the journaling strip. So I'm going to grab my craft knife and just slide some of these up here. I like to do my embellishment clusters in odd numbers because they're just more pleasing to the eye. If you have an odd number, it forces you to view it as a single group, while if there's even numbers, the eye wants to divide them into pairs. So I'll add another set of 3 down here underneath the journaling. And that's just going to, like I said, be a stopping point for the eye. So you start in one corner, you go all the way through the design, and then you'll stop right down here. And that just about finishes off the design. So here's a look at the completed page. Thanks so much for watching today. And for more scrapbook projects, please visit my blog at lisadickinson.typepad.com. Bye now.